The history of socialism has its origins in the French Revolution of 1789 and the changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution, although it has precedents in earlier movements and ideas. The Communist Manifesto was written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in 1848, just before the revolutions of 1848 swept Europe, expressing what they termed scientific socialism. In the last third of the 19th century in Europe, social democratic parties arose in Europe, drawing mainly from Marxism. The Australian Labor Party was the world's first elected socialist party when the party won the 1899 Queensland state election. In the first half of the 20th century, the Soviet Union and the Communist parties of the Third International around the world mainly came to represent socialism in terms of the Soviet model of economic development, the creation of centrally planned economies directed by a state that owns all the means of production, although other trends condemned what they saw as the lack of democracy. In the UK, Herbert Morrison said, "Socialism is what the Labour government does," whereas Anaya and Bevan argued that socialism requires that the mainstreams of economic activity are brought under public direction, with an economic plan and work as democracy. Some argued that capitalism had been abolished. Socialist governments established the mixed economy, with partial nationalizations and social welfare. By 1968, the prolonged Vietnam War gave rise to the New Left, socialists who tended to be critical of the Soviet Union and social democracy. Anarcho-syndicalists and some elements of the New Left and others favored decentralized collective ownership in the form of cooperatives or workers' councils. At the turn of the 21st century, in Latin America, Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez championed what he termed socialism of the 21st century, which included a policy of nationalization of national assets such as oil, anti-imperialism, and termed himself a Trotskyist supporting permanent revolution. Origins of socialism. Some of the verses of the Bible which inspired the communal arrangements of the Anabaptist Hutterites include Acts chapter 2, the verses 44 and 45. All the believers were together and had everything in common, selling the possessions and goods they gave to anyone as he had need. Acts chapter 4, verse 32. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of his possessions were his own, but they shared everything they had. And Acts chapter 4, verses 34 and 35. There were no needy persons among them, for from time to time those who owned lands or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone as he had need. Mazdak preached and instituted a religion-based socialist to proto-socialist system in the Zoroastrian context of Sasanian Persia. In Britain, Thomas Paine proposed a detailed plan to tax property owners to pay for the needs of the poor in agrarian justice, while Charles Hall wrote The Effects of Civilization on the People in European States, denouncing capitalism's effects on the poor of his time. The English word socialist in its modern sense dates from at least 1822. Chartism, which flourished from 1838 to 1858, formed the first organized labor movement in Europe, gathering significant numbers around the People's Charter of 1838, which demanded the extension of suffrage to all male adults. Prominent leaders in the movement also called for a more equitable distribution of income and better living conditions for the working classes. The very first trade unions and consumers' cooperative societies also emerged in the hinterland of the Chartist movement, as a way of bolstering the fight for these demands. By 1842, socialism had become the topic of a major academic analysis by German scholar Lorenz von Stein in his Socialism and Social Movement. According to an 1888 volume of A New English Dictionary on Historical Principles, the word Socialism first appeared on 13 February 1832 in Le Globe, a liberal French newspaper of Pierre Leroux. Leroux returned to the theme of socialism in 1834, and Louis Ribord published Études sur les réformateurs contemporains aux socialistes modernes in 1842 in France. In England, Robert Owen was also using the term socialism independently around the same time. Owen is considered the father of the cooperative movement. The first modern socialists were early 19th-century Western European social critics. In this period, socialism emerged from a diverse array of doctrines and social experiments associated primarily with British and French thinkers, especially Robert Owen, Charles Fourier, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Louis Blanc, and Saint-Simon. Early 19th-century followers of the utopian theories of such thinkers as Robert Owen, Claude Henry de Saint-Simon and Charles Fourier used the term associationism to describe the beliefs. These social critics criticized the excesses of poverty and inequality of the Industrial Revolution, and advocated reforms such as the egalitarian distribution of wealth and the transformation of society into small communities in which private property was to be abolished, outlining principles for the reorganization of society along collectivist lines. Saint-Simon and Owen sought to build socialism on the foundations of planned, utopian communities. According to Sheldon Richman, in the 19th and early 20th centuries, socialism did not exclusively mean collective government ownership of the means of production but was an umbrella term for anyone who believed labor was cheated out of its natural product under historical capitalism. According to some accounts, the use of the words socialism or communism related to the perceived attitude toward religion in a given culture. Continental Europeans considered communism more atheistic than socialism. In England, however, communism sounded too close to communion, with Catholic overtones. Hence atheists preferred to call themselves socialists. By 1847, according to Friedrich Engels, socialism was respectable on the continent of Europe, while communism was the opposite. The Owenites in England and the Fourierists in France were considered socialists, while working-class movements which proclaimed the necessity of total social change termed themselves communists. This latter trend was powerful enough to produce the communism of Etienne Cabet in France and of Wilhelm Weitling in Germany. In the post-revolutionary period right after the French Revolution of 1789, activists and theorists like François-Noël Babeuf, Philippe Aubut-Onarrata, and Auguste Blanc were influenced the early French labor and socialist movements. Josiah Warren is widely regarded as the first American anarchist, and the 4-page weekly paper he edited during 1833, The Peaceful Revolutionist, was the first anarchist periodical published. Anarchist Peter Sabatini reports that in the United States of early to mid-19th century, there appeared an array of communal and utopian counterculture groups. William Godwin's anarchism exerted an ideological influence on some of this, but more so the socialism of Robert Owen and Charles Fourier. After success of his British venture, Owen himself established a cooperative community within the United States at New Harmony, Indiana, during 1825. One member of this commune was Josiah Warren, considered to be the first individualist anarchist. For American anarchist historian Eunice Minette Schuster, it is apparent that Proudhonian anarchism was to be found in the United States at least as early as 1848, and that it was not conscious of its affinity to the individualist anarchism of Josiah Warren and Stephen Pearl Andrews. William B. Greene presented this Proudhonian mutualism in its purest and most systematic form. There were also currents inspired by dissident Christianity of Christian socialism, often in Britain and then usually coming out of left liberal politics, and a romantic anti-industrialism, which produced theorists such as Edward Bellamy, Frederick Denison Morris and Charles Kingsley. Henry de Saint-Simon, who is called the founder of French socialism, argued that a brotherhood of man must accompany the scientific organization of industry and society. He proposed that the state carry out production and distribution, that allowing everyone to have equal opportunity to develop their talents would lead to social harmony, that the traditional state could be virtually eliminated or transformed. Rule over men would be replaced by the administration of things. Charles Fourier François-Marie Charles Fourier was a French utopian socialist and philosopher. Modern scholars credit Fourier with having originated the word feminisme in 1837. As early as 1808, he had argued, in the theory of the four movements, that the extension of the liberty of women was the general principle of all social progress, though he disdained any attachment to a discourse of equal rights. Fourier inspired the founding of the communist community called La Reunion near present-day Dallas, Texas, as well as several other communities within the United States of America, such as the North American Phalanx in New Jersey and Community Place, and 5 others in New York State. Fourierism manifested itself in the middle of the 19th century. Literally hundreds of communes were founded on Fourierist principles in France, N. America, Mexico, S. America, Algeria, Yugoslavia, etc. Robert Owen advocated the transformation of society into small, local collectives without such elaborate systems of social organization. Owen managed mills for many years. He transformed life in the village of New Lanark with ideas and opportunities which were at least 100 years ahead of the time. Child labor and corporal punishment were abolished, and villages were provided with decent homes, schools and evening classes, free health care, and affordable food. The UK government's Factory Act of 1833 attempted to reduce the hours adults and children worked in the textile industry. A 15-hour working day was to start at 5:30 a.m. and to cease at 8:30 p.m. Children of 9 to 13 years could work no more than 9 hours, and workers of a younger age were prohibited. There were, however, only 4 factory inspectors, and factory owners flouted this law. In the same year Owen stated, leaving England for the United States, Robert Owen and his sons began an experiment with a socialist community in New Harmony, Indiana in 1825. Advertisements announced the experiment for the cooperative colony, bringing various people to attempt an 8-hour workday of which Owen was a proponent. The town banned money and other commodities for trade, using labor tickets denominated in the number of hours worked. Owen's son, Robert Dale Owen, would say of the failed socialism experiment that the people at New Harmony were a heterogeneous collection of radicals, enthusiastic devotees to principle, honest latitudinarians, and lazy theorists with a sprinkling of unprincipled sharpies thrown in. The larger community lasted only until 1827, at which time smaller communities were formed, which led to further subdivision, until individualism replaced socialism in 1828. New Harmony dissolved in 1829 due to constant quarrels as parcels of land and property were sold and returned to private use. Individualist anarchist Josiah Warren, who was one of the original participants in the New Harmony Society, saw the community as doomed to failure due to a lack of individual sovereignty and private property. He wrote of the community, It seemed that the difference of opinion, tastes and purposes increased just in proportion to the demand for conformity. 2 years were worn out in this way, at the end of which I believe that not more than 3 persons had the least hope of success. Most of the experimenters left in despair of all reforms, and conservatism felt itself confirmed. We had tried every conceivable form of organization and government. We had a world in miniature. We had enacted the French Revolution over again with despairing hearts instead of corpses as a result. It appeared that it was nature's own inherent law of diversity that had conquered us. Our united interests were directly at war with the individualities of persons and circumstances and the instinct of self-preservation, and it was evident that just in proportion to the contact of persons or interests, so are concessions and compromises indispensable. In a paper dedicated to the governments of Great Britain, Austria, Russia, France, Prussia and the United States of America, written in 1841, Owen wrote, "The lowest stage of humanity is experienced when the individual must labor for a small pittance of wages from others." Pierre-Joseph Proudhon pronounced that property is theft, and that socialism was every aspiration towards the amelioration of society. Proudhon termed himself an anarchist and proposed that free association of individuals should replace the coercive state. Proudhon himself, Benjamin Tucker, and others developed these ideas in a mutualist direction, while Mikhail Bakunin, Pyotr Kropotkin, and others adapted Proudhon's ideas in a more conventionally socialist direction. In a letter to Marx in 1846, Proudhon wrote, Mikhail Bakunin, the father of modern anarchism, was a libertarian socialist, a theory by which the workers would directly manage the means of production through their own productive associations. There would be equal means of subsistence, support, education, and opportunity for every child, boy or girl, until maturity, and equal resources and facilities in adulthood to create his own well-being by his own labor. While many socialists emphasized the gradual transformation of society, most notably through the foundation of small, utopian communities, a growing number of socialists became disillusioned with the viability of this approach and instead emphasized direct political action. Early socialists were united, however, in the desire for a society based on cooperation rather than competition. Marxism and the Socialist Movement. The French Revolution of 1789, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote, abolished feudal property in favor of bourgeois property. The French Revolution was preceded and influenced by the works of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose social contract famously began, "Man is born free, and he is everywhere in chains." Rousseau is credited with influencing socialist thought, but it was François-Noël Babeuf, and his Conspiracy of Equals, who is credited with providing a model for left-wing and communist movements of the 19th century. Marx and Engels drew from these socialist or communist ideas born in the French Revolution, as well as from the German philosophy of G.W.F. Hegel, and English political economy, particularly that of Adam Smith and David Ricardo. Marx and Engels developed a body of ideas which they called scientific socialism, more commonly called Marxism. Marxism comprised a theory of history as well as a political, economic and philosophical theory. In the Manifesto of the Communist Party, written in 1848, just days before the outbreak of the revolutions of 1848, Marx and Engels wrote, "The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property." Unlike those Marx described as utopian socialists, Marx determined that The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. While utopian socialists believed it was possible to work within a reform capitalist society, Marx confronted the question of the economic and political power of the capitalist class, expressed in their ownership of the means of producing wealth. Marx and Engels formulated theories regarding the practical way of achieving and running a socialist system, which they saw as only being achieved by those who produce the wealth in society, the toilers, workers or proletariat. Gaining common ownership of the workplace is the means of producing wealth. Marx believed that capitalism could only be overthrown by means of a revolution carried out by the working class. The proletarian movement is the self-conscious, independent movement of the immense majority, in the interest of the immense majority. Marx believed that the proletariat was the only class with both the cohesion, the means and the determination to carry the revolution forward. Unlike the utopian socialists, who often idealized agrarian life and deplored the growth of modern industry, Marx saw the growth of capitalism and an urban proletariat as a necessary stage towards socialism. For Marxists, socialism, or as Marx termed it, the first phase of communist society, can be viewed as a transitional stage characterized by communist state ownership of the means of production under democratic workers' control and management, which Engels argued was beginning to be realized in the Paris Commune of 1871, before it was overthrown. Socialism to them is simply the transitional phase between capitalism and higher phase of communist society. Because this society has characteristics of both its capitalist ancestor and is beginning to show the properties of communism, it will hold the means of production collectively but distributes commodities according to individual contribution. When the socialist state naturally withers away, what will remain is a society in which human beings no longer suffer from alienation and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly. Here, society inscribe on its banners, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. For Marx, a communist society entails the absence of differing social classes and thus the end of class warfare. According to Marx and Engels, once a socialist society had been ushered in, the state would begin to wither away, and humanity would be in control of its own destiny for the first time. International Workingmen's Association. In Europe, harsh reaction followed the revolutions of 1848, during which 10 countries had experienced brief or long-term social upheaval as groups carried out nationalist uprisings. After most of these attempts at systematic change ended in failure, conservative elements took advantage of the divided groups of socialists, anarchists, liberals, and nationalists to prevent further revolt. The International Workingmen's Association, also known as the First International, was founded in London in 1864. Victor Laloux, a French radical republican living in London, invited Karl Marx to come to London as a representative of German workers. The IWA held a preliminary conference in 1865, and had its first Congress at Geneva in 1866. Marx was appointed a member of the committee, and according to Saul Padova, Marx and Johann Georg Icarius, a tailor living in London, became the two mainstays of the International from its inception to its end. The First International became the first major international forum for the promulgation of socialist ideas. In 1864, the International Workingmen's Association united diverse revolutionary currents including French followers of Proudhon, Blanquists, Philadelphus, English trade unionists, socialists and social democrats. In 1868, following their unsuccessful participation in the League of Peace and Freedom, Russian revolutionary Mikhail Bakunin and his collectivist anarchist associates joined the First International. They allied themselves with the Federalist Socialist sections of the International, who advocated advocated the revolutionary overthrow of the state and the collectivization of property. The Social Democratic Workers' Party of Germany was founded in 1869 under the influence of Marx and Engels. In 1875, it merged with the General German Workers' Association of Ferdinand Lassalle to become what is known today as the German Social Democratic Party. Socialism became increasingly associated with newly formed trade unions. In Germany, the SPD founded unions. In Austria, France and other European countries, socialist parties and anarchists played a prominent role in forming and building up trade unions, especially from the 1870s onwards. This stood in contrast to the British experience, where moderate New Model unions dominated the union movement from the mid-19th century, and where trade unionism was stronger than the political labor movement until the formation and growth of the Labour Party in the early 20th century. At first, the collectivists worked with the Marxists to push the First International in a more revolutionary socialist direction. Subsequently, the International became polarized into two camps, with Marx and Bakunin as the respective figureheads. Bakunin characterized Marx's ideas as centralist and predicted that, if a Marxist party came to power, its leaders would simply take the place of the ruling class they had fought against. In 1872, the conflict climaxed with a final split between the two groups at the Hague Congress, where Bakunin and James Guillaume were expelled from the International and its headquarters were transferred to New York. In response, the Federalist sections formed their own international at the Centennial Congress, adopting a revolutionary anarchist program, Paris Commune. In 1871, in the wake of the Franco-Prussian War, an uprising in Paris established the Paris Commune. The Paris Commune was a government that briefly ruled Paris from the 18th of March to the 28th of May 1871. The Commune was the result of an uprising in Paris after France was defeated in the Franco-Prussian War. Anarchists participated actively in the establishment of the Paris Commune. The 92 members of the Communal Council included a high proportion of skilled workers and several professionals. Many of them were political activists ranging from reformist Republicans, various types of socialists, to the Jacobins who tended to look back nostalgically to the Revolution of 1789. The reforms initiated by the Commune, such as the reopening of workplaces as cooperatives, anarchists can see their ideas of associated labor beginning to be realized. Moreover, the Commune's ideas on federation obviously reflected the influence of Proudhon on French radical ideas. Indeed, the Commune's vision of a communal France based on a federation of delegates bound by imperative mandates issued by their electors and subject to recall at any moment echoes Bakunin's and Proudhon's ideas. George Woodcock manifests that a notable contribution to the activities of the Commune, and particularly to the organization of public services, was made by members of various anarchist factions, including the Mutualists Corbett, Longuet, and Vermorel, the Libertarian collectivists Varlin, Malin, and Lefrançois, and the Bakuninists Elie and Elisée Reclus and Louise Michel. The veteran leader of the Blanquist group of revolutionary socialists, Louis-Auguste Blanquer, was hoped by his followers to be a potential leader of the revolution, but he had been arrested on March 17 and was held in prison throughout the life of the Commune. The Commune unsuccessfully tried to exchange him, first against Georges Darboy, Archbishop of Paris, then against all 74 hostages it detained, but Thiers flatly refused. Some women organized a feminist movement, following on from earlier attempts in 1789 and 1848. Thus, Natalie Lemel, a socialist bookbinder, and Elizabeth Dmitriev, a young Russian exile and member of the Russian section of the First International, created the Union des Femmes pour la Défense de Paris et les Soins aux Blessés on April 11, 1871. The Women's Union also participated in several municipal commissions and organized cooperative workshops. According to Marx and Engels, for a few weeks the Paris Commune provided a glimpse of a socialist society, before it was brutally suppressed by the French government. For the outset, the Commune was compelled to recognize that the working class, once come to power, could not manage with the old state machine, that in order not to lose again its only just conquered supremacy, this working class must, on the one hand, do away with all the old repressive machinery previously used against it itself, and, on the other, safeguard itself against its own deputies and officials by declaring them all, without exception, subject to recall at any moment. Following the 1871 Paris Commune, the socialist movement, as the whole of the workers' movement, was decapitated and deeply affected for years.